Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Look, if you're watching this right now, chances are you're taking a massive step in your coding journey. You are building your very first app. First off, huge congratulations. That is incredibly exciting. But as you start piecing together your front end and your back end, you've likely hit a super common yet absolutely critical architectural roadblock. How exactly do you securely handle your users? Well, as your virtual senior developer today, I'm going to help you navigate this. So, how will users actually log into your new app? It's literally the fundamental question every single developer faces when building an application. You need a rock-solid way to verify who a user is, right? And then you need to remember them as they click around so they aren't constantly retyping their passwords. When it comes to user authentication, there are really two main ways to get the job done: sessions and tokens. Choosing the right one completely changes how your infrastructure behaves. So let's figure out which one is right for your first big project.
Method 1. Traditional server-side sessions. This is the classic approach to web authentication.
Okay, let's dive into this. The authentication process begins with Step 1. A user fills out their username and password and submits it to your server. Step 2. Your server checks those credentials, validates them, and then, for Step 3, it creates a session right inside your database. Next up, Step 4. The server responds back to the front end with a unique session ID. Now, this ID is saved in the browser's cookie jar, which is basically a built-in stash in the web browser designed specifically to save key-value pairs. From that moment on, every single time the user clicks a link or makes another request, the browser automatically pulls that session ID from the cookie jar and sends it back to the server, so the server knows exactly who is making the request.
Now, because the server responds back with content designed specifically for the currently logged-in user, we call this a stateful session. The front-end client and the back-end server are perfectly synced up. And honestly, this approach works incredibly well. But imagine your new app goes viral. Suddenly, you've got millions of users. Because most of today's cloud applications are scaled horizontally, meaning you're adding more and more servers just to handle all that massive traffic, your architecture has to change. If you have to store every single active session ID in the database or keep it in memory on the server, checking that database for every single user click, that becomes a system-crushing bottleneck in production.
Let's move to and see how this builds into Method 2. Token-Based Authentication, the modern alternative that solves our scaling problem.
The process starts out exactly the same. The client sends its login details to the server. But here is where the magic happens. Instead of storing a session ID in a database, the server generates a JSON Web Token, or JWT. This token is created and signed with a private key right there on the server. Then, it sends that token back to the browser, where it's normally kept in local storage, rather than the cookie jar. Think of this just like a hotel keycard. The front desk, which is your server, verifies your ID once, gives you a secure, mathematically signed keycard, and sends you on your way. You don't need the front desk anymore. You just show the card to your room door, and the door trusts the signature.
And this brilliantly illustrates how we handle future requests. When the browser makes a new request, it doesn't automatically send a cookie. Instead, you, the developer, write a tiny bit of code to add that JWT into the request's authorization header. Specifically, it's prefixed by the word bearer. You're basically telling the server, hey, grant access to the bearer of this token.
This split screen right here is exactly why tokens are loved for modern web apps. With traditional sessions on the left, the server gets the ID and has to do a database lookup somewhere else in the infrastructure to see if the user is legit. That causes lag. With tokens on the right, the server only needs to validate the mathematical signature on the token instantly. There is absolutely no need for a database lookup at all. This instant verification completely bypasses the database, which is way more efficient when you're dealing with a distributed system in the cloud.
Section 3. Comparing security and state. It's time to weigh the risks and storage differences of both methods.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the massive shift in burden between these two methods. With sessions, your client uses the browser cookie jar, but your server bears the heavy load of using database or memory storage. With tokens, it completely flips. The client takes on the storage burden using local storage, while the server requires absolutely no storage for authentication. The server is completely stateless.
Let's talk risks. Traditional sessions can be vulnerable to cross-site request forgery. That's a sneaky trick where an attacker forces a logged-in user to silently submit a malicious payment or maybe change a password. But hey, don't panic. The risk today is very low, especially if you use a modern framework to implement your code, because they handle this right out of the box. Tokens, on the other hand, carry different risks. They can still be hijacked by an attacker if your front end is compromised. And even worse, Because the server isn't tracking them in a database, tokens are notoriously difficult to invalidate or revoke before they expire. Plus, you literally can't use tokens to authenticate a user in the background on the server.
So, the crucial point is this definitive takeaway. With a session, the authentication state is entirely handled on the server, while with tokens, that authentication state is managed over on the client. Understanding that core difference changes how you're going to code your entire backend, and it tells you exactly when to use which. For example, if you're building an internal company dashboard where you need strict control to revoke access instantly, you absolutely use sessions. But if you're building a massive public mobile app that needs to scale to millions of devices effortlessly, tokens are going to be your absolute best friend.
Section 4, the final developer quiz. Let's see what you've learned. All right, here is your scenario. Your new app launches, goes completely viral, and your cloud application scales horizontally across 50 servers. Which method bypasses the database and prevents a bottleneck? If you said token-based authentication using JWTs, you hit the nail on the head. Tokens allow the server to instantly validate signatures without ever checking a database. You are officially ready to implement your first login system. Keep learning about web security, keep building those apps, and thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.